Welcome. It's me, Aaron the Artist. Thanks for sitting down with me today for another relaxing art lesson. Today I'm going to be taking a look at how to draw hair on your anime characters. This character specifically is of course a female character, and we're going to be drawing long hair. You don't need any supplies except for a pretty simple office pencil. You can see I've started out by drawing the character's face and head, and on top of that we are going to place the hair. The first thing I will point out is that it's important to draw the whole of the character's skull, not just the part that's going to be visible. We draw the whole of the skull because the hair is obviously going to sit on top of the head, so we need to have some idea where the head actually is. A lot of times beginners will do this thing where they kind of chop the top of the character's skull off or give them a really small forehead, and that can be avoided just by drawing the entirety of the skull like you see here. I've also gone ahead and drawn the hairline. You can see that kind of M shape running across the front of the forehead and then down towards the ears. That is the hairline where all of the hair sort of stops and we transition into the forehead. You can make this further back or more towards the eyebrows. It really varies with the character. Now what I want to do to get things started is identify a point from where the hair is going to flow, and we call that the part of the hair, where all the hair is going to grow from. Once we've got that though, I like to start in a slightly different way to most people. I like to draw the overall shape or outline of the hair without paying any attention to any of the other details. Now the reason I do it this way is because when you look at the most successful anime character designs, most of them are readable as just outlines. What I mean is that, take for example Goku, you can tell that a character is Goku just from the outlines, even if all of the details are erased. You can figure out that it's Goku just from the silhouette because he has such a distinctive outline. And if that's the goal, then we should start by creating an interesting graphic shape. Of course, we're keeping things relatively simple just for this tutorial. We've got a nice simple example of long hair and the graphic shape that would create. Once we've got that, I've decided I'm going to split the hair into two main parts, one part going off to the left and one part going off to the right. And they're going to split right from where I put the part there. And you can see that the side on the right is going to be the larger, or perhaps the main side, let's say, and we're going to start by adding the details there. I'm just going to erase all of the parts that are going to get covered up by the hair. You may still be able to see them just because I drew them slightly darker than I would normally, so that you guys would be able to see what I had done. So please excuse the mess that may be there. What we're doing here is breaking that section up on the right into a series of smaller sections. I like to think of the hair as kind of ribbons flowing away from the parting. You can see that particularly with that very first clump of hair that I drew. So look at the way that it wraps around itself. We want to think of the hair, yes, as a 2D graphic shape on the outside, but also on the inside as having some three-dimensional form. That's why I have pieces that wrap around themselves. With longer hairstyles, it's common to have pieces that flow down past the ears, perhaps covering them up partially or entirely. Now, one question I always had as a beginner is, how do you know where to put these strands? And the answer to that question is it's partly random and it's partly designed. There really is no fixed place that the hair strands have to go, and there's no specific anatomy to it. They do have to follow the general flow of the hair from the parting all the way down. However, the way that the actual hair strands come out is really a matter of design. You want to have a mix of big shapes, medium shapes, and small shapes so that things look interesting. If you have all of the hair clumps coming out at the same size, everything can look very uniform and very lifeless. So it's important to vary the sizes of things. You can see this here with this particular strand that I'm drawing. I have a very thick strand that runs past the ear and then a thinner strand that's closer to the eye. This left-hand side of the hair is really playing a supporting role. It's not intended to be the main emphasis on the hair. The main aspect is that clump that we started with at the very beginning on the right-hand side. These other elements are designed just to sort of support that. Once we've got the main shapes in, you can see that I like to add a few smaller strands that just break that main graphic shape up into smaller sections. If you don't break the shape up like this, it can start to feel a little bit unnatural, almost like a kind of plastic wig. It's important not to overdo it, but just to add a few random strands. That about does it in terms of the actual drawing of the lines of the hair. I often find that this sort of thing never looks quite right until you've added some of the shading. So we're just going to get to that, and I'll give you some tips and advice on how we can make that work. The first thing that I find helps is to have good variation in your line weight. This is where you have some parts of the hair that are thick and some parts that are thin. Now, exactly which parts is it that need to be thick and which thin? I find that it looks best when you add thickness to all of those areas that would be more in shadow. So all of those little cracks and crevices where you would expect light to be blocked, perhaps where the hair overlaps itself or where it overlaps with the skull, those areas are going to be blocked from any light and are going to be really quite dark. So you'll find that it looks best if you darken those areas in with a thicker line. I also tend to do a thicker line around the edge of the entire character. That's not so much anything to do with lighting, it just makes a more interesting graphic look. Now we can get to the real shading. Where exactly does the shading go? That depends on the lighting. But in general, you're going to have parts that are receding backwards behind the skull be in more darkness, because as the hair goes back behind the skull, it gets shaded by the head and by the hair that's in front of the face. And so you generally get a section back there that is quite dark. You can also use the shading to indicate some of the form, perhaps where the hair sticks up from itself or where it overlaps with other parts of the hair. And you can see some of those areas being shaded in right now. The shading can take quite a bit of time, so I'm just going to kick things into a little bit of a faster time lapse so that we can get this done in a reasonable amount of time. Alright, we're coming to the end of this now. Hopefully you can see the way that things come together quite a bit more once you've added that shading. In particular, pay attention to the way that some parts are quite a bit darker than other parts to show that the hair is flowing over the top of other strands. And that conveys a real sense of three-dimensionality to the hair. A lot of times you see beginners drawing hair and it's quite flat and two-dimensional, and that's because they don't allow the hair strands to flow over the top of one another, and they don't use the shading to show the ways that the hair strands overlap. Hopefully you can see the way that I would do that here using a mixture of different line weights and shading. In any case, I hope that you learned a thing or two about drawing from me here today. That's just about everything we needed to go over. If you want to see any of my personal art, you can see that on YouTube Shorts. Have a nice day, folks.